Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my January wrap-up. So January was kind of a funky month. I got off to a really slow start and I was really struggling with my focus. To be honest, I still am kind of struggling with my focus, but luckily I had a couple vlog projects that I'll link down below that really motivated me to get some reading done and were a good push to get through things. I am rolling a couple books over into February that I didn't get done in January, but I talk about those in my February TBR. If you want to know what those are, you can check that out there. And I DNF'd 2 books, which we'll talk about real quick. So I DNF'd Across Dark Seas by Claire Sager. This is the book that I've had on my Kobo for a couple of months now, and it's a prequel to her Beneath Black Sails series, which is like a pirate fantasy romance series, I believe. And I didn't quite realize what this was when I picked it up, but I ended up being bored, and it's really just the setup for who the main character is in book 1, and I got 40% into it and realized I didn't really need the setup. Like I'm happy to just read the series and meet the main character in that if I decide to continue with the series. But I ended up getting pretty bored and knew if I pushed myself to finish it, it would only be maybe a 3-star at best. And I'm not looking for that kind of energy this year. So I DNF'd. The other one I DNF'd is one of the books that I pulled from my TBR jar for January, and it was Infinity Gate, singular, by M.R. Carey. And my issue with this is that M.R. Carey really has the science for multi-dimensional travel figured out. And he wants you to know that he has a science to explain it. He has the receipts, and he is going to give you the most scientific explanation possible for how this multiverse travel is going to work. And y'all, it may make me a bad sci-fi reader, but I don't care. I don't care. It made it so boring, and I just didn't care. And it's too big of a book, so I DNF'd it. I gave it my prerequisite 50 pages, which is at the what I try to give all books before I decide whether or not I'm going to DNF, and I just didn't care. So those are my DNFs, and we're going to dive in here pretty quick. I do have goals every month that I'm trying to hit. One is to read a book off of my Kobo that I've had on there for a while, not a book that I've bought within that month. Beneath the Claire Sager book was the one that I picked, and DNF counts. So we got that one done. I also try to read one nonfiction every month, and I cheated a little bit this month. I did read one nonfiction, but it's a book of essays, which is fine. Like it's still nonfiction, but I'm not learning anything, I guess. But I did read Southern Lady Code by Helen Ellis, and we'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it when we get into the wrap-up, but I did like it. Also for Buzzword Reading Challenge, for the title prompt, it was to read a book with lies or truth in the title, and I reread The Lies of the Ajungo by Moses Osei Utomi. This is one of my favorite books. It's so good. This series, this novella series, and this author are chronically underrated. I need more people to read it because I freaking love his writing so much. These are so good. They're so short, but they packed such an impactful punch in the short amount of pages. More people need to read him. Also, the series wraps up this year, and they're so good. Okay. And then the cover challenge for Buzzword was to read a book with a pattern, and I read But Not Too Bold by Can I remember the author's last name? No, I can't, and I don't have it written down. So, but you'll see it right here. I read this for that. And then for Jan Agaton's Patreon, she does a coffin cover challenge where you have to read a book with something specific on the cover every month. And this, for January, it was a clock on the cover. And for that one, I read The Seventh Bride by T. Kingfisher. Is that it? Oh, and then for a year of Butler and Gaskell, which is my personal reading challenge for the year, I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Okay, so let's dive in. I have been doing Smooch, Marry, Kill for my wrap-ups for a couple of months now, just to kind of gamify and make it more fun. And it's been doing that. I don't dread filming wrap-ups quite as much as I used to. So we're gonna pull 3 titles at a time. I'm gonna say whether I would smooch, marry, or kill them. Sometimes I kill books that I actually really loved. It just kind of depends on what else gets pulled along with it. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in. So our first grouping, we have Full Speed to a Crash Landing by Beth Revis, The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid, and Animal Farm by George Orwell. Okay. I am going to kill The Last White Man, sadly. I was really excited to read this because I thought the premise sounded very interesting, and I was really eager to see what how Hamid would play with these themes. And the setup for this is that our main character, whose name I've forgotten, Anders, who is white, he wakes up one day and is no longer white. He is now, it never says specifically if he's black or brown, but his skin is different. Like, he's no longer a white man. And this virus, I guess, slowly starts to spread among the white people. And theoretically, you're watching how American society handles the slow erasure of white people. But I felt like while the idea was really interesting and could have been so thought-provoking, I feel like Hamid's writing got in the way. Primarily how not good I thought the writing in this was. Hamid has so many run-on sentences in this book. Basically every paragraph is one sentence, and the way he uses commas and ands ended up coming across really juvenile. Like, it reminded me a lot of when I am helping my 9-year-old with sentence structure. It just took all the oomph out of what could have been a really cool book. So unfortunately, I just did not like this. Also, the audiobook experience was not good. Hamid reads it himself, and he had a very staccato, abrupt narrative style, and it made it really hard to listen to. So was not a fan. But don't worry, I read a book with a similar idea in January as well, and it was much better. So we'll talk about that when I get there. And then I am going to, I guess I'm going to smooch Animal Farm by George Orwell. I hadn't read it before, and I picked it up because it was the book choice for Betty's Pages Challenge Yourself Reading Challenge. And it was just a book that I missed somehow in high school. And I ended up seeing why it is taught so much to young people. And I think the primary impact for me, because I know there was a lot of commentary on communism and Stalin and what was going on in the US and Russia, or not US because George Orwell is British, but like what was going on with Russia's like influence on the world at the time and leading up to when Orwell wrote it. But I think the primary message that stood out for me is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think especially like as a US citizen in 2025, like I see that. I see what Orwell was talking about reflected in what like my country's government is like right now. And so that was kind of terrifying. And well, not kind of, it was absolutely terrifying. That being the thematic statement for me for that book really made it impactful. And then we will marry Full Speed to a Crash Landing by Beth Revis. This is a sci-fi novella romance. And we're following, I've forgotten the character and I already had to take it back to the library, so bear with me. But we're following Ada. Oh, you meet her and the hull of her ship has been blown apart and she's slowly suffocating because there's no oxygen on her ship. The life support has malfunctioned. And then she is rescued and wakes up on the ship. And then we have kind of like this cat and mouse heist situation. And there's not a full-blown romance, but there is like the beginning of one, and it's first in the series. This is one I do not recommend on audio as well because I felt like the narrator made all of Ada's thoughts pretty cringe, because Ada is very much like Full Speed to a Crash Landing refers to Ada's approach to how she lives her life. And so a lot of her lines can be really over the top and over dramatic, and like just it can be funny or it can be cringe solely based on the tone that her lines are read in, and I felt like the narrator picked the cringiest way to say her lines every single time. So I don't recommend them on recommend it on audio. I did really like reading it physically. It was a fast read. It wasn't like the best sci-fi romance I've ever read, but it's also really accessible sci-fi. Like, you're not having to wade through too much, sci-fi world building. Beth Revis makes it really easy to jump in and understand the world that these characters are existing in. And I am definitely going to be picking up book 2, which is why it's a Mary, because I'm going to continue on with the series. All right, next trio. We have Remember Us by Jacqueline Woodson, The Lies of the Ajungo by Moses Osei Utomi, and The Seventh Bride by T. Kingfisher. Oh no, this one's hard. I gave all of these a 4.5 to 5 star. This is a good stack. Nah, man. Okay. I'm gonna kill The Seventh Bride by T. Kingfisher. This is, I think, thematically and tone and character-wise more similar to A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking than any of her other books. I think it's technically adult, but it's one of those where it could be YA. It really bridges multiple age categories. And we're following our main character, Rhea, who is 15 and is the miller's daughter, and she is forcibly engaged to this real old baron who is basically like bullying her family into letting him be betrothed to her, and then she's sent to his house under very nefarious circumstances, and the plot goes from there. I don't really want to give you anything. There's elements of Bluebeard in here. There's elements of 1001 Nights. Like T. Kingfisher is really playing with fairy tales in this one, but I like that it's a really broad scope. There's also a lot of really heavy horror elements in this, which I really enjoyed, because I find I like T. Kingfisher the most when she really leans into horror. And the trials component of this and the horror elements, and then Rhea's voice, which is very like classic T. Kingfisher wry sarcasm, coupled with like really creepy shit happening, is like my perfect combination. I loved it so much. I had so much fun. I would recommend this on audio. I thought the audiobook narrator was really great voice for Rhea, and this was such a surprise. I was not expecting to love this as much as I did. And it's kind of like an older T. Kingfisher too. So yeah, it was a good time. And then I will smooch Remember Us by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a middle grade novel in verse. Jacqueline Woodson is like absolutely beloved by, I mean, so many people, but definitely in my house. Like, we all love her writing so much. I didn't know that my twins had already read this, I think for a class, and so it was really fun to talk to them about our thoughts on it. But we're following Sage, who's growing up in Brooklyn in the 70s, and there are a lot of fires breaking out in her neighborhood, and she's really at a time of change in her life, and for who she is internally, and then also like her mom is saving up to buy them a house to get them out of this neighborhood where the houses are built so close together that if one catches fire, the whole block could go up. And this is a period of time. These are a period of time and a period of events that really happened in Brooklyn. And while this is not autobiographical for Woodson, she did pull on her childhood in Brooklyn pretty heavily for this book. But I love Jacqueline Woodson's writing. I love how she writes kids. I loved Sage and her love of basketball and how fully real she felt in this book. And then I'm going to marry The Lies of the Ajungo. I'm going to marry it because it is a reread and because I love this series so dearly. This is a desert fantasy where we're following our main character, Tutu. And Tutu lives in the City of Lies where they don't have enough water and have partnered with this other nation called the Ajungo, and in return for barely enough water to survive, the Ajungo demand that every person once they turn 13 has their tongue cut out and sent to the other kingdom. And Tutu embarks on a quest to save his mother and save his kingdom. And I really loved this. Like I said already, I love Utomi's writing, and I love this Forever Desert series. Each book is a little bit different, but we're really confronting a lot of things that feel really relevant and important in this day and age. And I just love it. It's so cool. It's so good. And it's a good example of having your story be the perfect amount of words that you need to make an impact, and not bloating your story with a lot of unnecessary writing. Okay, up next we have Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and Cog by Greg Van Eekhout. This one's gonna be hard too. Oh no, these were all like over a 4-hour as well. I gotta stop getting, why are all the 2s not coming out to play? Okay. Oh, all right, I'm gonna kill Cog, but I really liked this middle grade. This is science fiction middle grade about a boy named Cog who's actually an AI, and he lives with the engineer who wrote his code and who made him, and she's raising him not exactly as a child, but giving him a lot of situations that he can learn from. And then there's an accident where Cog is hurt and he wakes up in the facility of the company that owns him. And then it goes from there of Cog trying to get back to the engineer who raised him. And I thought this was really fun. It was a great adventure book. It's got a little bit of a road trip. I thought the robot bots in here were so well written and so funny and so cute. It has such a wide range of personality. Trashbot was my absolute favorite because I have never felt so seen as when Trashbot is just trying to be useful so that he'll feel like he has purpose. I'm an oldest child. What can I say? I'm an oldest daughter. What can I say? This was really great. If you like middle grade, if you have a middle grader in your life and you want them to read more sci-fi, this is really accessible, really fun, really relatable, even though Cog is a robot. So I would say this is like a training ground for Murderbot. Like, I want my kids to read Murderbot. I'm going to give them this so that they start to get primed for relating to Murderbot. And I'm just going to kill it just because I probably won't reread it. And then I will smooch Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This was the first book in my year of Butler and Gaskell, where I am alternating reading an Octavia E. Butler book with an Elizabeth Gaskell book. And this is also science fiction. This is, well, I don't know, time travel. This is a time travel book. And I know Butler does not consider it science fiction. I read an interview with her where she said she considers it fantasy because there's no science in the time travel. It just happens. But this is about a woman who, she and her husband are in their house. They're newly married and she feels dizzy, and the dizziness passes. She is back in the antebellum South, and she saves a young boy named Rufus from drowning. And then once he is safe on land, then she feels dizzy again and she wakes back up and she's back in her house. And we proceed to follow, I'm so sorry I've forgotten her name, our main character as she tries to figure out why she's traveling back to the South in such a dangerous time to be Black, and what her relationship is to this boy named Rufus. This book is really short as well, but also like very impactful. I was really kind of surprised by how spare the writing felt, and not in a negative way. It just more highlighted how truly overwritten so many books are now, and that you can tell an impactful story without as many words as maybe you would think you need. It was hard to read, but it was also really well done and I really liked it. I was a little confused at the end, but I've read some like think pieces and some more academic discussions of this book and of Butler's work, and that really helped me work through kind of my confusion on what was the point of that story, because I think the ending is ambiguous and you don't get all the answers that you want, but it's purposeful. And then I am going to marry A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This is the third time I have read this book, and I read it for a science fiction and fantasy book club that I am in. I joined way too many book clubs for 2025, but everybody's reading such good books. I don't know how I was supposed to resist. And this is about Elle, who is unapologetically rude. I absolutely adore her. And she is in her junior year at the Scholomance, which is a magical school. This is dark academia where the school is trying to kill the students rather than the students are trying to kill each other. And I really like this. I love the setup. I love the school. I love how Naomi Novik structures this. And the audiobook narrator is just fantastic and captures Elle's voice so perfectly. And I really adore. Book 1 in particular. The whole series is fine. I think book 1 is truly spectacular. That feels bold. Okay, I'm gonna stick with it though. I'm gonna stick with it. Okay, now we are moving on to The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta, Adrift in Currents Clean and Clear by Seanan McGuire, and Southern Lady Code by Helen Ellis. Okay. I'm gonna kill Southern Lady Code, even though, again, I really liked all of these. I think these are all above a 4 as well. This might have been a 3.75, but this is a kind of mix of a memoir and an essay collection about Ellis's life existing in the world as a Southern woman. And these essays are short, they are humorous. She has a really delightfully funny way of looking at the world, and they're just, some of them are about important life events, some of them are just about random shit, like when she accidentally took another woman's coat from a party that looked exactly like hers and she didn't realize it until 2 or 3 days later. So some of them are silly, some of them are more serious, but I just really loved her sense of humor and explaining how maybe you're a little bit different if you were raised in the South. You navigate the world in a little bit of a different way. And obviously, like, this isn't going to be the same for every person who was raised in the South, but I really enjoyed Ellis's perspective on the world. And then I'm going to smooch Adrift in Currents Clean and Clear by Seanan McGuire. This is the latest installment in the Wayward Children series, and in this one we meet Nadia, who has appeared in other books, but I had no memory of her scenes in the other books, so for me this was kind of like reading a brand new character. I would say this is definitely one where you could read it as a standalone because it doesn't connect to other installments in a very strong way. But we meet Nadia, and Nadia is an orphan in Russia, and she grows up in this state-run orphanage. She's also disabled. She's missing half of her limb. She's just born without it. And Nadia is eventually adopted by American parents and taken back to the United States. And that's really where her story starts, because while Nadia knows she is perfect as she is and feels fully formed and whole the way she was born, her new adoptive parents do not see her that way, and eventually like force a prosthetic limb onto her. And that's the first half of the book, and then the second half of the book is her finding her door and going to this underwater world. I really liked the underwater world a lot. I thought the mechanics of it were super interesting. I also really liked how Seanan McGuire writes these people who the world is harming or ignoring or not listening to. You know, there's a lot of Nadia trying to stand up for herself in a very gentle way to her adoptive parents, and her adoptive parents being so rigid in the we know best, we're gonna do what we think is right, and you should be grateful that we're doing these things for you, even if they're things that she does not want at all. And I really liked how McGuire handled that portion of the book. So I think I gave it a 4, and then I gave it a 4.5, and I ended up dropping it down to a 4. Because when comparing it to the other books in the Wayward Children series, I didn't love it as much as I have loved other 4.5s, but I think this is still a really solid installment. And then I'm going to, no, did I do it again? Did I marry or smooch Wayward Children? I smooched it, right? Why can't I remember? Okay, it's fine. It's fine. It's just a wrap up. It's fine. We're gonna, my game, my rules. I'm smooching Adrift in Currents, Clean and Clear. Gosh, I hope that's what I said. And then I'm going to marry The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This is a YA novel in verse, about a boy named Michael who is biracial and growing up in London, and he is also gay, and it's about him grappling with his identity and not feeling a part of either of the cultures his parents are from, and also about him coming out to himself, to his family, to his friends. And you follow him throughout his adolescence and into high school, and then eventually he gets to university and he discovers drag culture, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's so well written. It feels so personal and authentic, and I kept having to remind myself that this was fictional and not a memoir or an autobiography. Like, Dean Atta is not, this is not, Michael is not Dean Atta. Like, this is a fictional story, but it feels so real for so much of the book, and I think the writing is stunning, and I just absolutely adored this. Like, it was so good. It's been on my radar for a really long time. I've had the audiobook for forever, and I'm so glad that I finally read it because it really did live up to the expectations I had in my head. Is Wannabe by Aisha Harris, Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell, and Come Out by Natalie C. Parker. I'm going to kill, so sorry to say, Wannabe, Reckonings with the Pop Culture That Shapes Me by Aisha Harris. This was my other nonfiction. Never mind, I read two nonfictions. They were just both essays. And this is about Aisha Harris's relationship with various pop culture growing up, in her teen years, and then as an adult, and each essay is about a different pop cultural zeitgeisty thing and how it relates to a particular time in her life. And I liked this. I thought it was well done. I don't have a relationship with Aisha Harris's work. She's a co-host of Pop Culture Happy Hour on NPR, and that's a podcast I've never listened to. I listened to another podcast for my pop culture information. This is like one of my favorite little nonfiction niches, is people who are writing about pop culture and how it relates to their experiences growing up, because we are of a similar age, and so I really liked how the pop culture that I consumed as a teen, like what Aisha Harris's relationship with that pop culture was. She did have a couple essays where I didn't really not agree with her. I mean, because it's personal and it's memoir, so it's how she feels about things, and I don't want to undervalue how she feels about certain issues. But there were a couple things where just the way things that I didn't necessarily agree with her in her opinion, which is fine, but it wasn't my favorite. And then I'm going to smooch Come Out by Natalie C. Parker. This is a YA queer horror that I read for Winterween, and I struggle with queer horror because I like the themes and I usually love the ending of them, but reading about queer people experiencing prejudice and hate from parents or their teachers or people who are supposed to be in a position to protect them, and instead get so caught up in their harmful religious teachings that they refuse to see the child that actually exists in front of them and just hyperfixate on the child they think they should be, or the teen, but you know, they're still kids. So I struggle with YA horror. I want to love it, but I find it really hard to consume until the ending. But this is about 3 teenage girls who experienced a really horrific event in 8th grade, and then this book takes place 5 years later. And yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot. Recommend if you like YA queer horror, which I feel like is really like having a moment right now between like this book and Andrew Joseph White's books, which I haven't read any of yet, but they're on the list. And then I'm Gonna Marry Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell. Now this is the other book that I read as kind of a makeup since the last White Man was such a disappointment. And in this literary sci-fi novel, we are following Charlie, and Charlie is a black man, and in this world, white people one day all collectively walked into the nearest body of water and drowned themselves. And we meet Charlie a year later, and he had been incarcerated before the event, and he is now a teacher at a university, and we're following him and his estranged daughter as they navigate this new landscape of the United States and what race means when white people no longer exist, and how insidious white supremacy is, even if you are a person, or maybe especially if you are a person who does not benefit from white supremacy. Yeah, it was really well done, very well written. I really liked the dual perspective of Charlie and his daughter Sydney, and I think Sibo Campbell just like knocked it out of the park by exploring these themes and this thought experiment. It was so good. It was so good. So yeah, if you also find like that exploration of like, what does a world without race look like? All right, next group, we have Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello, But Not Too Bold by Hatch Puyo, and The Mortal Arts by Anna Lee Huber. All right, this one's going to be easy. I am going to kill Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. This is supposed to be a horror novella. I don't think it's not a kind of horror that I like. It's a psychological horror, and we're following this woman who is a scientist, and she is having a neurological link to a wolf put into her brain because wolves are endangered, and her team of scientists are trying to figure out how to save them. And it's like a story of obsession, of an unhinged woman, but I really felt like this was very boring. It was very boring, and I felt like Lee Mandello really could have leaned into the unhinged behavior on our main character's part, and they never did, which just made it feel like, what was the point? Our main character is also married, and her relationship with her wife, like, they're both not great, and so you don't really have anyone to root for in the story, which is frustrating, and I just didn't have a good time. And it's such a bummer because this was my first Lee Mandello, and I wanted to read them for a while, and having my first experience be like a 2-star, not what I would have wanted for myself. And then I'm going to smooch Mortal Arts by Anna Lee Huber. This is the second book in the Lady Darby mystery series. I am trying to read one a month so that I keep going with this series and I don't stall out again. But we are following Lady Kira Darby, who is a widow, and her deceased husband was an anatomist in London and forced Kira to illustrate his autopsies against her will. And then when he died, she was thrown into scandal because it became apparent that she was present. And instead of blaming her trash husband, of course it's Kira's fault because it's 1830s UK. Anyways, though this is set in Scotland, but she was living in London at the time. Anyways, so in this one, Kira journeys to another estate, and this one more has to do with PTSD, and even though, you know, of course for the time it wasn't called PTSD, and asylums at the time, and how horrific they were and how horribly the patients were treated. And I didn't love it as much as I loved book 1. I felt like there was less action in this one, and it was more of Kira just going around and talking to a whole bunch of different people and having a lot of the same conversations over and over and over again. So I didn't love that component. Also the romance it felt like we kind of took a step back. And considering there wasn't a lot of steps in the first one, I didn't feel like we really had any back steps to take. So I didn't love it as much as book 1. I'm hoping I love book 3 more. And then I am going to marry But Not Too Bold. Now, here's the thing. I did not love But Not Too Bold as much as I wanted to. This is a gothic, sapphic monster romance about a woman who works in this house for this creature, this spider creature. And this is another book that kind of has a Bluebeard setup where this spider creature keeps taking brides and has very specific rules that the brides need to follow. But of course, inevitably, they break one of them, and then she has to eat them, like you do. And the book starts because something has been stolen from the monster, and she suspects a person on her staff of doing it, and so she eats that staff member, and our main character is then promoted to that position, but she knows that person that the monster ate would never have done it in the first place, and so she embarks to solve the mystery. And this didn't capture my heart the way I had really hoped it would. This comes out, I think this week or next week. It comes out pretty soon. I liked the writing, and I really liked how the romance developed. I thought it was it's not gentle, but the way they get to know each other and build trust with each other felt very gentle almost. They're very different books, but it reminded me of when I read Morning Glory Milking Farm, which gets a lot of hype because of the unhinged setup for that book. But when you actually sit down and read the book, the romance feels very cozy and very sweet and not shocking the way you would think it would be based off of what the synopsis is. And I felt like this book had a similar vibe where the synopsis makes it sound a little unhinged. But the actual development of the romance was very lovely. So, and this is not this author's debut because if I remember correctly, they've written a lot of short fiction, but this is the first like published into like on its own type of situation. And so I'm definitely like putting this author on my radar, and I'm interested to see what else they write in the future. So our last 4 books are The Changeling by Victor Laval, Where the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez, Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite, and Leech by Hiron Ennes. Ennes? I need to look up how to say this last name. Okay, I am going to kill both Leech and Murder by Memory. I was so excited about Leech. I really thought this was going to be like a 5-star or a high 4 for me. And while this started off really strong, we're following this doctor who is going out to this isolated chateau to be the in-house medical person for this aging baron and his family. And in this world, the doctors have kind of a hive mind setup. So there are doctors all over this world and all these different places, and they all share a hive mind. There's all this knowledge built in to being a doctor. And I was really excited about it because I had heard that it really plays with gender in a really cool way because the doctor is genderless, and kind of have like kind of a locked room murder mystery because the old doctor died. That body died under mysterious circumstances, and the new doctor who's going to replace it, like usually these entities have a memory of how the body before the new one died, but this one doesn't. And there's this like parasite that's invading people and animals in this chateau, and it just kind of fell flat for me. It wasn't doing the things that the book said it was going to do as well as I wanted the book to do it. I'd heard it was dense. It is kind of. I also feel like it's confusing without building the trust that the author will get you where you need to go. There were also some reveals that I really didn't care for. I didn't feel like they were very interesting, and I don't know. It wasn't bad, but I was definitely disappointed because I had higher expectations than what this actually ended up being, unfortunately. My other kill was Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite. This is a sci-fi murder mystery novella. My problem with this at the end of the day is that I think novellas are too short to do murder mysteries justice. I think it's hard to do a good murder mystery in such a short amount of pages. This also kind of leans into a type of science fiction that I don't like very much, which is we're way in the future, we're on this spaceship, and the fashion and the conventions and the manners and the things are mirroring 1920s or 1950s aesthetic. And I don't enjoy that very much. So, and that's what and that's not all this is, but that's a big component of that. So I didn't dig it. I'd actually had softy enough to this when I tried to read it physically, and then I was sent the audiobook by the publisher, and I did like the audiobook, and the only reason I was able to finish it because the audiobook narrator did such a good job. So there's that. And then I am going to smooch Where the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez. This is the sequel to What the River Knows. This is a little duology set in Egypt. It's historical fantasy, but like so light on the fantasy. Don't read it thinking it's fantasy. You need to go into it thinking it's historical fiction, and then you'll have a much better time with it. This is YA, and it's about Inez, who in book 1 finds out that her parents have died in Cairo, and she goes to Cairo to find her uncle and to find out what happened to her parents. So this is continuing the mystery of book 1. There is a romance in this duology as well. I thought What the River Knows was fine. And I enjoyed Where the Library Hides so much more than the first book. I really loved the romance in here. Book 1, we really only get Inez's perspective, and in book 2, we are alternating perspectives between her and Wit, who is her love interest, and it was so fun. It was so fun. It's such an adventure. It's so fast-paced. So many things happen. There's so much intrigue. I really feel like this is such a good time. It's so fun. So yeah, I had a great time with book 2, and I'm kind of sad it's over. But also kind of proud of myself for finishing the duology so close to each other, because I read What the River Knows like at the end of 2024. And then I am going to marry The Changeling by Victor LaValle. This is a horror, and I've wanted to read this for a really long time, but I've been very intimidated because I'd heard it was very scary. And it is scary. It's unsettling. This is about Apollo, who is married to a woman named Emma, and he and Emma have a baby, and Apollo just throws himself headlong into being a father. His dad was very absent, and so Apollo is trying to make up for all his father's faults in the way that he raises their son. And then one night, Emma does something truly horrific, and we skip ahead, was it 6 months, and Apollo is being released from prison for something he did in response to his wife's horrific actions, and he sets about trying to find Emma and the truth of what happened to their son, and it was very good. I'm just going to leave it at that. Very good. If you have seen the Apple TV show, I only watched the trailer for it, and it looks so different, and like the themes are so different. So I would say even if you've watched the TV show, like still pick this up because it was very, very good. And I really loved Victor LaValle's writing and how he described stuff and the themes and the imagery. It was so, 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 so good. All right, friends, there you have it. That is the end of my wrap up. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you like them, if you love them, if you think my opinion is wrong, if you think my opinion is right, if you see something and you think there's another book that I would like based on how I felt about whatever the title was in this one, I would love those recommendations as well. I'm always looking for new things to read. If you have nothing to say, but you want to let me know you are here, let's leave a tree emoji for The Changeling, or an elephant for Sky Full of Elephants. And like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll talk to y'all in the next one.